Perfect. Thank you very much for having me here today. My name is Michelle Balderson. I think you guys heard that. I'm coming from an organization called IS Squared. We focus on building secure platforms. And in my presentation today, I'm going to talk about the past of cybersecurity to be able to understand where we've been, to be able to understand where we're going. And right now, I believe that we're in a dystopian future relative to cybersecurity. A friend of mine, Richard Steinen, who was a VP analyst at Gartner, keeps track via a company called IT Harvest, keeps track of the number of cybersecurity vendors, and he's keeping track of over 5,300 different cybersecurity vendors. I've been in the industry for over 25 years of my life, and I can't keep up personally relative to the number of security vendors, and also I can't keep up with the hype. I'm not saying that I'm not a proponent to AI based off of some of the questions from the previous presentations. I just think that AI is the latest shiny object in the room, and that many of us don't actually do the security basics. So we should be looking at the basics first before we even start taking a look at the advanced technologies. So let me talk about operational technology. I'm an operational technology specialist, and in that operational technology specialist, it means that I'm working with systems that are cyber and physical in nature. So anything that's operations in the oil field, where there's a physical component to it, but it's also connected, and it's connected to the systems. Those systems are where my expertise has been lying for the last 7 years. Previous to that, I worked for Fortinet for about 20 years of my life, so one of the global cybersecurity companies. I started in 2004 when it was a $39 million company. And I've started to recognize a few things based off of what I've been seeing in the field, is that we take a point products approach and we take an approach of technology after technology after technology, and we have a tendency of forgetting about people, process, and culture. We need to really start thinking about people, process, and culture, and particularly in this world. I believe that we need a cyber-physical risk-based approach, right? So risk and security are not equal to each other, but the reality of it is that if we understand our exposures, we then understand what risks we may have, and then we can take steps to mitigate it. Whereas over the last 25 years, I've been dealing with customers from the perspective of, I'd like to be able to buy this technology. And a lot of the times I'll ask them the questions of, well, why are you doing this? And they don't necessarily have a good answer. So we really need to start the answer the question of why. So this is who I am. I come from IS Squared. We're a leading information technology company. I have put up my QR code, so if you want to trust my business card, by all means, take a picture of the QR code and you'll find that my contact information will be there. If you like me in person and you like to trust me in person, I also have those same business cards that I can hand to you in person. Let me ask you, the entire audience, a question. Look to the person to the left of you and look to the right of you. Do you trust them? Adam in the back room, we know for a fact we don't trust him, right? Adam, you need to leave the room, and I'm going to re-authenticate you as we go into this next conversation. So talking about, you can come back right in, but we created and one of the things in these slides, I want you to pay attention to a couple of things. Technology and who created it. And then start to take a look at it from the perspective of the different corporations that have created them. Some of them don't exist anymore. And then from the perspective of the organizations, so MITRE as an organization, government-run organization type thing. And then you'll also see analyst firms creating terms and terminologies throughout this presentation. But in OT, in the oil and gas field, MIT created authentication in the 1960s. Today, I can walk into the oil and gas field in Alberta and connect up into systems and not be authenticated. So what is that? Not 40 years, but 63 years. We've had authentication capabilities within computer systems, and we choose, by human nature, not to continue to deploy them. 15 years ago, I started on the rant of, this is the year of MFA, this is the year of MFA. and MFA never really started to come along until we started to see a lot of external services of systems rather than internal services of systems. Access control lists. We talk about layer 2 networking. I'm a networking expert because of working for Fortinet, and I understand networking quite well. We put access controls to be able to put traffic east-west within our environments, and the technology is over 60 years old. One of the Fortinet tests in a lot of the exams will talk about what the first virus was, but in fact it was a first worm, and the first worm and the first virus were created by the same organization. It basically said, "I'm the creeper, catch me if you can." And so the Reaper worm replicated and self-replicating. So this is the first iteration of self-replicating viruses, was the first malware that we had within our environments. We bring out by MITRE, we've talked about the MITRE attack surface, security kernel in 1974. Yet the kernels that we operate today are not secure by default. They're not secure kernels. Doesn't make a lot of sense. Public key infrastructure coming from Diffie-Hellman. And for the longest time in my early career, I thought Diffie and Hellman were German just because of the last names, but they're Americans, and they created the public key infrastructure. From the perspective of what we use for all our certificate management today is fairly aged. Everybody knows John McAfee. At least everybody knows all the strange videos from John McAfee anyway. But McAfee ended up being the first antivirus software. We then see packet sniffers from Network General. Many of the technologies that we're using today are foundationally off of the technologies that we've used in the past. Many of them used Network General's packet sniffing capabilities to be able to understand and then visually graphic you exactly what's happening within the network. We then go into packet filter firewalls, and I come from a firewalling company, so packet filtering firewalls is looking at the individual packets, filtering it all out, understanding what I can and cannot allow within the environment. And then you'll see stateful packet inspection come up in the next slide. But then you have role-based access controls. We need to be able to apply role-based access controls throughout our entire environment, but it's been around for a long, long period of time. Notice the extensive vendor sprawl, and notice that I missed the last 10 years of the timeline. And the reason why is because I couldn't continue to put in all of the different technology enhancements that we've seen in the last 10 years. And by the way, I'll share these slides. I'll share with them so you don't have to take pictures. But Checkpoint, and they're here today, created stateful firewalling. And then you go forward over, and then you have Palo Alto who creates the term next generation firewall. But IDC created unified threat management. And if anybody in the room can tell me the difference between unified threat management and next generation firewall, I'll give you a hug. Because the reality of it is that they're not anything different. It's how the analyst firm, Gartner couldn't use the UTM terminology because IDC created it, right? So it's all about the analyst firms that are influencing us and how we're spending our money. It's the vendors, it's the analyst firms. You'll see, very rarely will you see actually people's names coined to anything. Gartner, and I'm going to call them what they are, an IT analyst firm, created the term for operational technology. The reality of it is that they were like, oh, well, they're doing something similar to IT. We don't really know exactly what it is. So let's just call it operational technology because it's the operations department that we're dealing with. The reality of it is that operational technology is an engineering discipline, and information technology is not. And so from a security perspective, what we have to start to think about is, how do we evolve information technology into an engineering discipline, and how do we move security, and particularly into an engineering discipline, so that we engineer security for purpose and for the net result. We'll see further in endpoint detection and response. Gartner coined the term in 2013. By 2023, everybody's talking about endpoint detection and response. So it's the marketing hype, and then it's the technology that follows it, right? Oh, thank you very much for the clap. I really appreciate that because it's putting a lot of effort into building these presentations. So where we are, we talk about digital transformation a lot within business, But how do each of us define it becomes very difficult. So what we have to do is we have to look to the past. The Industrial Revolution was really taking us from a farming agriculture into an industrial agriculture, farming environment into an industrial environment, and that we're manufacturing goods. The information technology revolution started in the 1980s. I was born in 1967. I was an 80s child in high school, and I learned all my computer science, not all of it, but I learned computer science in the 1980s because of the information technology revolution, and now we're in the digitization revolution. We have analog processes, so something that we're doing analog, like let's use Excel spreadsheets. How many of you guys still use Excel spreadsheets? Those Excel spreadsheets, to my mind, are an analog, not a digital process. I'm just putting it in, and I'm not doing much with it. Whereas we're now starting to move things from an analog process into a digital process, and that's the digital revolution, to be able to make things move simpler and faster for people. So how do we put this in a graphical way? 1784, we have the Industry 1.0. It's using physical means to be able to take water out of the ground, and it's starting to use steam as a way of propelling things. Industry 2.0, we introduce electrification and mass production. That's where we start to see Ford and the assembly line come about. Industry 3.0, we end up introducing computerization, and then you start to see a whole bunch of terminology come out. PLCs, programmable logic controllers, RTUs, remote terminal units, IEDs, intelligent electronics devices. We're in the realization phase of Industry 4.0 as we move into we're at the realization stage of Industry 3.0 as we're moving into Industry 4.0, meaning we're now using data. Instead of physical, we're now using data to be able to collect data and being able to make better business decisions based off the data that we have. So with that, in the oil and gas field in Alberta, we'll talk about oil and gas specifically, we have high distributed points of physical equipment that create data. We're now using Industry 4.0 to be able to make better business decisions based off of the data. So if you're in those industries, oil and gas, manufacturing, electrical generation, transmission, distribution, you're making a conscious decision to use data and collect data from the field. So from a technical perspective, instead of talking about security, what we should be talking about is data aggregation and collecting data to be able to bring it into data lakes to be able to make better business decisions. And then we move into Industry 5.0, and a lot of people are like, oh man, I just learned about Industry 4.0. Industry 5.0 is started in 2020, and it's the introduction of cooperative robots on manufacturing plant floors, or being able to take the human tasks that we don't want to do, lifting things, those sort of things, and using a cooperative robot, and also being able to do mass customization. And I will talk to you about mass customization in my presentation as we move along. Operational efficiency demands digital transformation. If I want to become more operationally efficient, I need to digitally transform my environment. So in digitally transforming my environment, another way of looking at it is I'm connecting supply chain all the way through to the end customer. You guys don't trust each other. We've already proven that. We now interconnect you guys all together in systems where you're communicating messaging from each other, yet you're untrusted systems. Let's just use that for the concept within the audience. And so to adopt digital transformation, now the attack surface is exponentially greater. I'm interconnecting everybody in the room to be able to have a better output, but the reality of it is that I've now allowed the attackers to be able to have a greater visibility to what the environment is. And that's why we've seen ransomware increase since 2010, since the introduction of Industry 4.0, we've seen an exponential growth of ransomware. Why is that? Because we're interconnecting systems we've never interconnected before. So what's happening in the business environment? We're shifting to digital. Talked about analog processes. We're doing analog measurements. We're converting it to digital signals, and then we're aggregating our data. We're focused on safety and availability of our systems, and when we start thinking about OT, and we apply it to IT, how many of you ever thought about data from a safety perspective? What's the safetiness of your data? Can you kill your data? Well, yeah, you can, because you can put it on a backup, you can kill it, you can delete it, you can bring it back, right? But when you talk to an operational technology professional, I can't kill people on the production floor because they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, right? We may want to. So we're focused towards productivity and uptime, and we're focused towards safety and availability of human life. We want to be able to gain operational efficiencies. We're really focused towards the customer experience. How many of you guys noticed in the last 10 years that when you're consuming goods, you can start to get a more personal approach? It feels better because you're buying something. Well, that's intentional. But I also need to be able to do product integrity and product tracing. I need to know where this product sourced from the source of it to how it was created, and all of the processes in between by the time that it is received by consumer, and particularly in foods manufacturing. How many of you have noticed a lot more recalls relative to food? Why? Because we're tracking it a hell of a lot more. And then, the uncomfortable name in the room is compliance. We all need to be able to be compliant, yet we don't necessarily collect the data or aggregate the data in the way that we need to be able to show compliance. So, OT security evolution. In 1784, I would go and I would break your pump. And then your family wouldn't survive because you wouldn't get water. By 1870s, it was also industrial espionage. 1929. Now, for me, I'm a tenant of history. Winnipeg General Strike occurs in the 1920s, forget exactly the date. The Winnipeg General Strike occurred because of the fact that manufacturing plants in Winnipeg, and Winnipeg was the second largest city in Canada at that particular point in time. But all of the manufacturing was done in Western Canada, and people were dying on manufacturing lines because of it. So we now have the unions come in the 1930s, and then we start to then build in safety culture. We need to be able to take safety culture and evolve safety culture to security culture. But we introduced the PLC in 1968. We talk about air-gapped environments and trust, untrust. Do I trust you? Do you trust me? Because computer science got it wrong in those years. Why? Because trust, untrust model should have never occurred. But that's exactly how we set up systems. Safety culture was updated after Chernobyl, 1986, yeah. In 86, when Chernobyl occurred, the operators did not understand how to safely shut down the systems. Therefore, then, training and safety started to increase. Industrial level firewalls were introduced in 2001 by a company called Tofino Networks. They're owned by a company called Balderson today. And they segment the lower levels of the process zone. So if you hear a lot from firewall vendors about segmentation, microsegmentation, they're really talking about 20, 25-year-old technologies. We see a systematic vendor tool called Industrial Defender. They focus towards risk. What is the risk? What are the exposures to my environment? And how do I reduce that exposure? That's one of the things that we need to start thinking about from a security perspective. How do I reduce exposure? We introduced Industry 4.0 in 2010 and then Industry 5.0 in 2020. We introduced visibility vendors. So we talked about the NIST framework. How many of you guys have used NIST frameworks from a security perspective today? Identify, detect, protect, respond, recover. What I find is I get many customers identify, detect, protect. They never get to respond and recover. Thank you. 20 minutes left. And then you don't have to deal with me anymore. Or you could come up, I do public speaking all the time, but I'm forgetting people's names, and I don't know why. I'm getting older. I'm 55 years old. So if you'd like to reintroduce yourself to me, and if I met you before, please do that, and I'll give you my business card. Or if you want to introduce to me the first time, please come over and talk to me. So IDS vendors come into this concept of, hey, we just need to know all of the assets within the environment. Unfortunately, just understanding the assets without having the framework around it doesn't result in good cyber hygiene. So now let's talk about the risks to the environments. If you've ever been to an OT talk before, everybody needs to bring up Stuxnet. Stuxnet occurred, it changed the industry, and everybody's all worried about security of it because of Stuxnet. Let's take a look at Stuxnet as a nation-state attack. It required social engineering. It required 0 days to happen, to be able to use Stuxnet. I'm not going to go through all of the different attacks because you guys are getting obliterated with the number of attacks that are occurring on a regular basis today. But when you fast forward to past 2016 into 2020, 2018, 2019, 2020, what we're seeing the attacks are cyber-physical in nature. They're coming from the internet. The IT department becomes compromised. Then it goes over into OT, and the operations become compromised. And so really what we need to be able to do is to start thinking about how we shore up IT security to be able to protect the operations of our business. When I started, and I was one of 3 people that started the OT team at Fortinet, which is, I'm happy, it's about 250 employees today. But in this latest report, 95% of our organizations have moved operations security under the CISO. Why? Because previously it was under folks that were only solely worried about the OT side, when really, in fact, it's an IT and an OT, and it's an enterprise security challenge. So I want to educate you guys on manufacturing processes and how they've changed. And
in the world. Of course, I'm talking about the Showtime rotisserie and barbecue. And even if you're on a diet, look at just
Hello, my name is Ron Papil, and I'm going to set it and forget it.
A delicious 5-pound chicken. Not one,
5-pound
but
chicken. Oh my God, you can have 2 5-pound chickens.
An 8-pound mouth-watering pork loin roast.
So the point of this video is
9
this.
juicy quarter-pound hamburgers.
A manufacturing process that Ron Papil mastered is everybody in the room. You get a rotisserie, you get a rotisserie, everybody gets a rotisserie, right? Well, now you fast forward to the technologies of today.
I'm Steve Bryant, your host
and
today.
You can pause, and we'll move forward. And we're going to talk about dynamic manufacturing processes. How many of you guys have bought a shoe customized specifically to yourself? There we go. Custom materials. How many of you have bought in on buying a Tesla and going through the buying experience of a Tesla? Not very many. Okay. So from dynamic manufacturing processes, I can make individual decisions on purchasing based on the individual desires of the individual. Isn't that a hell of a lot more powerful than set it and forget it and Ron Papil? Although I want one of those rotisserie ovens. My partner's in the room. Farron, you cook really well. I need one of those rotisserie ovens. So this is the static process. And everybody remember Carol Burnett's show? I'm starting to age myself. But everybody can watch these things. Now, Nike asked the question, what if you were a shoe?
What if you were a shoe? Is the idea so absurd? Well, if you could be such a thing, you'd have to be, what's the word? Not a word like flawless or perfection, but just some idea you get in the produce section. It's all play when you customize. There's no wrong or right. Go pop some colors or keep it simple, like all white. What's your jam? What's your thing? No more thought than this. Design your shoe as a league champ or an opera-loving botanist. Just turn up the what's newness or the stay trueness, but with much more blueness, as a gift from your Aunt Eunice.
I wonder what my auntie got me. Whoa, these are great.
Eunice. That's it.
So we have the Eunice of today from the perspective of our ability to be able to order and customize things. I'm just going to get rid of the video here. And in digital transformation from a consumption perspective, we as human beings can't keep up. How many of you overwhelmed with the amount of data that is coming into your life? How many of you guys are trying to cut it out, right? Like, I quit Facebook for 7 years of my life because I just couldn't handle it. Too much, I don't want it. I'm not on Twitter X, any of the social media platforms. Yet I feel the pressure all the time from the perspective of, hey, I have to be interconnected. Do we? Do we really have to be interconnected? And so with that is that what we need to be able to do is start focusing towards education and empathy. Now, I'm going to go back into the 50s or 60s, whenever this was created.
All right, girls. Now, this is your last chance. If one piece of candy gets past you and into the packing room unwrapped, you're fired. Yes, ma'am. Let her roll!
Anybody remember the end or the whole video here? So is there empathy involved here from the perspective of understanding? So when we start talking about operations in IT and IT security is that we have to be empathetic. We talk in acronyms. People don't understand us. I sit in this conference and I'm a security professional and sometimes the content I don't understand. And it's perfectly fine to be able to say that because I'm a specialist in specific areas and we need to be able to have empathy for each other. From the perspective of operations in IT, it's not us versus them. It's us being able to deliver to the business what we need to be able to, what we need to be able to deliver. So there's a need for cyber-physical risk management and mitigation solutions. So today, we have a whole bunch of manual processes. How many of you agree that security ultimately ends up in manual processes? We end up having a whole bunch of manual processes. We have limited or partial visibility to what is actually our systems are all about. How many of you have an accurate inventory of all of your assets? There's a customer in the room that has about 250,000 nodes on their network. 15 years ago, I walked into a meeting with the executive and I said, hey, the best way to secure your environment is to understand all of your assets. The meeting ended at that point. Because we weren't prepared. They weren't prepared for that asset conversation. So how can you secure something if you don't know you have it? You have to have an asset inventory. You have lack of operations and business context. I'm going to use this example again. Look to your neighbor. Do you know what they do? Do you know who they're connected to? Do you know how they're connected? Or why they're connected? Or what their criticality is? Do you know why they're here? So, lack of business context and operations. You don't hear very many security vendors talking about business context or operations. It's the flashy new thing. I need AI. Why do I need AI? How do I secure AI? Right? That's what I was trying to propose the question in the last session. How do I secure AI? Then, I have minimal attack surface management. How many of you in the room, from the perspective of to IT professionals and IT security professionals, can understand your attack surface and how you're managing your attack surface today? And I'm asking these tough questions because this is the reality. We have focused way too much towards technology. We put too much focus and too much trust in the vendors. I worked for a vendor for 20 years of my life. I love their products. But the reality of it is that I cannot determine what my attack surface is internally or externally today, for the most part. Not with the technologies that most companies have deployed. So I want to be able to understand what my attack surface is. Then we start to move into multi-vendor, multi-generational, inherently insecure. How many of you know that you have insecure devices within your environment? Right? So we know for a fact that we have insecure devices, but we don't understand our attack surface. So we need to be able to understand and apply the insecure devices and understand that to attack surface. How many of you guys understand indicators of compromise? My environments, I've got indicators of compromise. So, indicators of compromise, past tense. This is what's happened within your environment. What about what is happening within your environment? How about indicators of exposure? Maybe we should be focusing towards exposure of systems and what exposure they have, because then at that point you can take a risk framework approach and you can reduce the exposure, therefore then you're never compromised, or, oh, fuck, I just did it. I said something that's not possible. You will be compromised. We know for a fact, and I'm sorry that I swore, but, and just delete that from the video when you're done. Safety and performance are a top priority, right? What do the executive care about? That's the questions that we need to answer. Governance, compliance, and regulations with policies. So any of you guys are GRC professionals in the room? Governance, risk, and compliance professionals? Oh, good, good. So we've got security professionals in the room. Threat risk analysis. Does it make logical sense to you guys that I do a threat risk analysis of my environment once a year? And then it changes 480 million times throughout that year. So TRAs, and look, I come from a company that does consulting. It's lucrative consulting business for those companies. But why not just simply have real-time threat risk analysis so that you can then understand the risk to your environment and the indicators of exposure to your environment at any given point in time? So stop paying the consultants and start looking at it from a process perspective. Manual processes converted into digital processes. I'm a big believer in this. How many of you guys use spreadsheets to understand frameworks? How many of you guys like ISO 27001 or IEC 62443 from a framework perspective? So these organizations, they create them, they put them into PDFs, and then we have to interpret them and we have to read them as security professionals. Well, why don't we just do digital ingestion of those frameworks? It only makes sense to me. Digitally ingest those frameworks, then at that point, there's less learning curve. Global compliance standards required. This is just a selection below these logos. IEC 62443, EN 50155. That's for train rolling stock. The NIST cybersecurity framework. I can go on and on and on. NIST Directive 2. If you're a global security, if you're a global multinational, and this is where part of my career, I started working a lot with global multinationals, they have to comply with every single one of these. Oh, not only that, but I sell to retail. I have to sell, and I have to be PCI compliant. Each one of those have distinctive controls, but the reality of it is that the controls overlap. Therefore, then, we need to have global standards. Continuous reporting aligned to agile business models. We're using agile business models to be able to make our businesses better, and we're flattening them out. And so from that perspective, we need to be able to then move security into agile business models as well. For once, security and the people in this room, we're behind the business. And I don't think that has been, I can't say that throughout my entire career that we have been. The business is moving faster than us in security, and therefore then we have to start to adopt the technologies that they're using to be able to have their business models become more agile. Our business models need to become more agile. And this last piece, and this is a contentious conversation with a database person, I believe in unified data lakes, or unifying of and doing data aggregation to be able to understand how to aggregate the data, to be able to pull out that information. Now, I could go and say, well, we're going to use AI. We're going to use machine learning. No, let's just use the systems. We can use AI and machine learning, but let's get to the basics first. Let's collect the data, then at that point start to be able to make those business decisions. Governance, risk, and compliance, we have wasted resources, after the fact thinking. We're using it as a snapshot in time, and I'm not going to go through that because I got 5 minutes left, and I've got a very key message that I want to send to you from the perspective of the NIST cybersecurity framework. Adam, what's wrong with this? And I love you, man. I didn't plan it. It's backwards. Why is it backwards? Because most customers look to identify, detect. They get stuck at identify and detect. They never finish the rest of the model. The model is not intended to go level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. The model is to be able to look at what security controls you need to put in place that are associated to the business that you're protecting. So I can go through all these models, but the point that I want to be able to make is if you start with managing and optimizing, you actually spend less money. You put fewer security controls in place because you know for a fact these are the security controls that I need to be able to put in place. And the slide that I skipped was the security controls themselves, and I'll be more than happy to share it. But I want you guys to start thinking about it not from the perspective of linear thinking. I'm a salesperson, so I jump all over the place. But from the perspective of selectively choosing what you need, reduce the cost of security, and increase the value of what you're getting out of security by not putting all of the controls that the security vendors are telling you to put in, but only put in the ones that are relative to your business. Culture. Culture, I think, is the most important thing. We started talking about culture, but we want to be able to embrace a culture of safety and availability of systems and people's life. Safety and security equal each other. That's the message here. Then we move into this message. We have cultural conflict between IT and OT. And in that, we have CIA rule, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And then we have the SAIC rule, safety, availability, integrity, and confidentiality. And so with that, what we want to be able to do is learn and have empathy for each other to be able to understand how we don't get to this. There's a war in the industries going on right now from the perspective of IT and OT and who's right and who's wrong. The reality of it is that both are serving the business and both are correct and both are wrong. The other concept I want you guys to think about too is this, is that we talk about tools all the time at these conferences. I can sell you this next generation firewall. I can sell you this ATP. I can sell you this EDR. I can sell you this XDR. I'm getting so tired of the terminology. What I'm trying to say is that you want to be able to take a look at tools in context to a toolbox or in context to a platform. So we're using, in the application world, we're using Microsoft and Google as application platforms. In security, we need to start thinking about security-based platforms. Now, there's vendors out there that are doing that. Cisco builds a platform. Microsoft builds a platform. Fortinet builds a platform. We want to be able to think about a platform and then focus towards risk and risk-based mitigations. So number one, identify the assets. Number two, identify the vulnerabilities, understand the vulnerabilities. From a vulnerability program, I see lots of people ending up in lots of organizations saying, hey, you know what, I have 15,000 vulnerabilities. I can't address all those 15,000 vulnerabilities. That's where context comes in, which is, why address a vulnerability if it can't be breached? Contextually, if it can't be breached. If the system is so deep into the systems and you've figured out there's no attacker path to get there, then you don't have a need to address that vulnerability. Whereas the vulnerability vendors will tell you I have to address everything. Apply policy to affected assets into the organization and vulnerabilities, and understand the context. Discover network assets and being able to understand that from a contextual perspective and giving it to you from a different learning perspective. I'm dyslexic, and from a dyslexia perspective, I have to learn, I have to read it, I have to see it, I have to hear it. Many people don't understand why I do those things, but that's when I remember it. I want to be able to give different people different viewpoints. I want an operator with an operator context. I want an IT security analyst with a security analyst context. So apply threat modeling and scenarios to address risk across your entire environment. And from that, then infer what mitigation steps that need to be taken to be able to reduce the exposure to your environment. And I'll leave it at that with the top 5 things I'm going to suggest that you do. Build an operational technology and risk security program, and if you're in IT, build an IT security risk program. Build a cybersecurity management system, CSMS. That's what it's called in IEC 62443 terminology, but essentially is continuous risk mitigation from the highest level to be able to understand what you need to be able to do at the lower levels. Improve security by understanding the risks and the gaps to your environment, and then have continuous involvement of stakeholders and domain owners. We do not ask the business enough as security professionals what they need and how they would recommend that they secure the environment. We need to be able to start doing more of that. And then operate safely with context to being able to make business decisions. This is the advertisement of who IS Squared is. I'm going to use Colonial Pipelines as an example. The executive said this: we had to shut down the OT systems and Colonial Pipeline attack for the pipeline, because they had the data to understand, but they didn't have the data to be able to interpret it, and so they did not know if they could operate safely. So you want to be able to answer the executive question, how much risk do we have? And how can we operate safely? Thank you very much.